This PowerPoint reviews transduction and sense receptors and how the two work together to form perception. We have special receptors in our sense organs that work to develop our sensation. These organs include the eyes, the ears, the skin, the tongue, and the nose. And you're likely aware of the associated sense for each of those organs. When these special receptors convert outside information into neural activity, this is called transduction. Light is both waves and particles, which we interpret through brightness, color, and saturation. Brightness is determined through amplitude of waves. The higher the waves, the brighter the color. The lower the waves, the dimmer the color. Color is determined by hue. Long wavelengths indicate a redder color, whereas short wavelengths indicate a bluer color. Saturation is determined through the purity of a color, and if you have only red or only blue waves, that is a very high or pure saturation. If there is a mix of red or a mix of blue waves, then the saturation is pretty low. When light reflects off of an object and enters the eye, it goes through the cornea, which focuses the light. The light then enters into the pupil of the iris muscle, and the muscle is actually going to change shape to allow more or less light into the eye. The light then moves along into the lens of the eye, which visually accommodates and determines how close or how far the image is. And the very last stop would be the retina. Images are actually upside down and reversed, however, our brain accommodates for this in order for us to see images right side up and not reversed. So how do we actually perceive the sense of sight? There are two theories to help explain sight perception. The first theory is the trichromatic theory and states that the perception of sight comes from different shades of colors corresponding to different amounts of light received by three cones, a red cone, a blue cone, and a green cone. These cones then send messages to the brain vision centers for processing, and it processes the different wavelengths of the light to develop our sensation and perception. The opponent process theory states that cone receptors are linked together in pairs such as blue-yellow, red-green, and black-white. However, a receptor cannot send information on both colors of a single pair at the same time, which is why we can't describe colors such as reddish-green or bluish-yellow. This theory also helps explain the color deficiency or differences in how each of us as individuals perceive color. And one great example of that is the dress that went viral in 2015. And if you aren't familiar, the dress shown here spawned a viral internet debate about what the colors of the dress were. Some individuals saw black and blue, while others saw navy and gold. You can read more about it in the New York Times by clicking on this link here. Color blindness is caused by defective cones in the retina of the eye, or according to the opponent process theory, a lack of chemical is needed for processing. Color blindness is more common in men than in women because men only need one recessive gene to be colorblind, whereas women need two recessive genes to be colorblind. In this picture here, are you able to see the red number 29 within the circle of green dots? If not, you might be colorblind. Now we move on to the sensation of hearing. We hear through wavelengths as determined by pitch or frequency, amplitude as determined by volume, and timbre as determined by the richness of sound. Hearing is measured as hertz. The perception of hearing is explained by three theories, and the first theory that we'll cover is place theory. Place theory says that a person hears a sound depending on the location of the stimulated hair cells or cilia on the organ of corti. Right here is the oval window that is connected to the organ of corti. And a high-pitched noise would stimulate hair cells that are very close to the organ of corti, and a low pitch would stimulate hair cells that are further away from the organ of corti. The second theory is the frequency theory. And this theory states that pitch is related to how fast or slow the basilar membrane vibrates. A faster vibration yields a high pitch, and a slower vibration yields a low pitch. And right here in this picture, you can see where the basilar membrane is located. And its vibration comes from the fluid in the cochlea. The final theory that we'll go over is the volley principle. Human hearing limits are between 20 and 20,000 hertz. The volley principle explains for the perception of hearing for pitches only between 440 Hz and 4000 Hz. Essentially, the volley principle notes that auditory neurons take turns firing in a process called volleying, hence the name. If a person hears a tone of 3000 Hz, that means 3 groups of neurons have taken turns sending messages to the brain based on 1000 Hz increments. All right, so we have a few more senses we need to go over, including touch, taste, and smell. Sense of touch, or somesthetic sense, occurs through our skin senses, kinesthetic sense, and vestibular sense. Skin sense is responsible for touch, pressure, temperature, and pain. It also maintains fluid inside your body and keeps germs outside of your body. It receives and transmits information from the central nervous system. Kinesthetic sense allows us to be aware of the location of our body parts in relation to other body parts. This occurs through special receptors of the muscles, tendons, and joints. This is why you know where your body part is, even if you move it while your eyes are closed. Vestibular sense allows us to be aware of body movement and position. This sense is located in the inner ear and comprised of the otolith organs and the semicircular canals. The otolith organs are tiny little sacs that sit above the cochlea and are filled with the fluid that suspend tiny crystals. These crystals cause the fluid to vibrate and let you know when you are moving forward, backward, sideways, or up and down. The semicircular canals are 3 circular tubes filled with fluid that stimulate hair-life receptors, or cilia, when they are rotated. This particular organ senses body rotation. Motion sickness, or sensory conflict theory, is explained by the somatic sense. Essentially, there is a disagreement with what the eyes see and what the vestibular organs are sensing. And remember, these organs are the ones that are in your inner ear with the tiny fluids and that suspend crystals. This can occur on a plane, in a car, or on a boat, and symptoms typically include nausea, dizziness, and disorientation. Sometimes people can alleviate this through medication or by focusing on one spot or specific area. And finally, we have the sensation of taste and smell. Taste and smell work together through gustation and olfaction. Taste receptors are the taste buds on your tongue, and there are a total of 5 senses, and these include sweet, salty, sour, bitter, and umami. And if you're not familiar with umami, you can associate that with a more savory taste, such as broth like chicken soup or oily products like tuna. And here's a fun fact for you. Taste buds are replaced every 10 to 14 days. That's why when you burn a taste bud or two on that nice hot cheesy pizza or your hot cup of coffee in the morning, it's not a permanent type of damage. Olfaction receptors are replaced every 5 to 8 weeks, but there are thousands of them, unlike taste buds, where there are only 5. Cilia, or nose hairs, are stimulated by different molecules or substances that are within the air. And these molecules, or senses of smell, travel to your olfactory bulbs in your brain, which lie right below your frontal lobes. And then this sense continues to travel to the olfactory cortex and orbitofrontal cortex, where it stops at the amygdala for processing. So that is the end of this PowerPoint video that explained transduction, which is the interpretation of information from your senses, and how these senses operate. If you have questions, feel free to contact me, or you can post in the general discussion board within this week's module. As always, thanks for watching.